A former American fighter pilot who has since become an Australian citizen will be extradited to the US for allegedly training Chinese pilots. Daniel Duggan was arrested in 2022 and charged with a series of offences, including conspiracy, arms trafficking and money laundering. US authorities have been fighting to have him trialled in America since his arrest. They allege Mr Duggan was paid more than $100,000 to train China pilots how to land jets onto aircraft carriers without the US military's permission. The 56-year-old denies the charges made against him. His wife has expressed her shock and heartbreak at the decision.
We feel abandoned by the Australian government and deeply disappointed that they have completely failed in their duty to protect an Australian family. We are now considering our options. It is very difficult to explain to the children why this is happening to their father, especially now at this time of year. We are all terrified that we may not see him for a very long time.
Well, joining me live is lawyer, Afghanistan veteran and advocate for the Duggan family, Glenn Kolomeitz. Glenn, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us today. Mr Duggan's family, we just heard from his wife there, but they received a letter from the Australian government essentially telling them that the government had determined that Dan is set to be surrendered to the US sometime between the 30th of December and before the 17th of February. What legal basis does it have to do this?
Holly, the Extradition Act is quite clear, and the treaty with the United States, the extradition treaty, is quite clear, albeit it's a very, very dodgy treaty. It makes it so difficult to contest these sorts of things. But lawfully, the Attorney General can. The process they've gone about this is well just wrong. But that's something we're hoping to address again, which we've tried to address on a number of occasions.
Well, the family opposed the extradition back in August, I understand, but has never received a response from the government to that opposition. Is that your understanding as well?
That's the case, Holly. In fact, Dan, I've got a copy of the one-page letter from the Attorney General here. That's the extent of the correspondence. It's just telling Dan that the government's asked the US to come and get him. Look, we submitted an 89-page submission on this. We've had no response to that, and then this one-page letter doesn't address any of the issues we raised, detailed legal issues that we raised.
Can you talk us through some of what those legal issues were that you raised?
Firstly, the charges are so non-specific; they don't particularise anything. So we've asked for some sort of particulars about the alleged offending. Issues such as the fact that that the alleged offending wasn't a crime under Australian law at the time, which itself is a requirement under this extradition legislation and this process. Look, it's the way they've dealt with this all along. The Australian government has been quite atrocious, and hence 89 pages of deeply researched submissions which have been ignored.
The most concerning bit that you just said there, which stood out to me, is that these aren't crimes in Australia, but yet this is going ahead. What legal options does the family have now?
Look, counsel for Dan Bernard Collaery is considering options with the family right now, whether there's options of review or otherwise. But look, it makes it very difficult. The act is quite draconian, the Extradition Act, as is the treaty with the US, so it makes it quite difficult to challenge this now. But nonetheless, options are being looked at. This family's devastated, and we're taking every possible option to try and prevent this. Really,
Glenn, from a legal perspective, do you believe the Australian government has let the Duggan family down, like his wife suggested earlier?
Oh, absolutely, legally and morally, if I can say that as a lawyer. But look, this has been atrocious. This whole process has been atrocious, and unfortunately, it's enabled by this US-Australia extradition treaty, which makes it so it really gives the US a walk-up start on these sorts of things, and makes it very difficult to contest an extradition. Unlike treaties with other countries where they have to actually prove something, the US don't need to prove anything in our courts. They just need to have the documents there, and the government can tick off on what's really an administrative process. So that needs to change, and the act needs to be changed. Legally, this is a very bad process.
Okay, Glenn, I also want to get your thoughts on one of our top stories this morning, this Aussie captured in Ukraine. You've previously advised Ukraine's foreign forces. How do you see this playing out for Mr Jenkins? Is a prisoner swap likely in your perspective?
Well, the prisoner swap, I was actually contacted yesterday morning by Mr Boykov, who is a former Australian citizen holed up in the Russian embassy in the Russian consulate in Sydney. And his barrister contacted me. I tried to reach out to Penny Longstaff. I had no response, of course. But look, there could be a prisoner swap, possibly with Mr. Boykov, or certainly with captured Russian troops captured by the Ukrainians. That's a possibility. The ball really is in Russia's hands right now. It's very difficult for the Australian government to have any real control over this. Bear in mind, Holly, that Russia prosecutes captured legionnaires under their domestic criminal law as mercenaries. Now, these guys aren't mercenaries. They're actually part of the Ukrainian military. So what Russia's doing is illegal. But that's the options Russia have. They can lock him up for 15 years, or they can look at a prisoner swap. And I think the Boykov option would have been pretty good, but Minister Longstaff chose to ignore that so far. So we'll see what happens.
We'll see how that plays out. Glenn, we do have to wrap things up. Merry Christmas and thanks for your time this morning.